I'm now joined by Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Jon Meacham and Michael Bender, White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and the author of the book I just quoted from, Frankly, We Did Win, the inside story of how Trump lost. That's one of those where you have to read not only the title, but the subtitle, right, Michael?
That's right. I kind of consider it all there.
And let me bring in Jon Meacham to start. And make sure, I just want to make sure Michael's audio is pretty good. I think we got most of that. But, Jon, what's the takeaway from a lot of the type of bombshell reports we're getting now?
Well, I think Putin may be interfering with Michael's signal there. I think the central takeaway is that we were in incredible danger, and we still are, as a republic. This is not a partisan point. These are important revelations that are filling out a picture of a moment in which autocracy, dictatorship, and end to the rule of law, the things you care about enormously, were in fact that attack on those things was sustained, and we managed to pull this out at the very last minute. But everybody's luck runs out, and I think we all have to redouble our vigilance if we believe in the constitutional experiment in democracy.
Michael, well, what does your reporting show?
Well, I think the through line in this book is that when it comes to the people who were closest around Trump, the Mark Milley's of the world, Mike Pompeo's, Ronna McDaniels at the Republican Party, the Mike Pence's, these types of folks. We're not concerned about the sort of chaos story that we've been talking about for years of the Trump administration. Like Jon, what came out in my reporting for the book was that they thought some of them thought Trump was a danger to the country, that he'd become reckless and violent in his desperation to hold on to power. And we see this time and time again. I mean, Ari, he said in a room full of people in the Oval Office that he wanted to shoot Americans who were protesting civil rights injustices. Mike Pompeo left others with the impression that he thought Trump wanted to lean into a war, or might lean into a war, in order to strengthen his argument to not leave office. I mean, these are the kinds of details, that just throughout the book kind of illustrate that point.
Yeah, Michael, and something I've wondered, covering it along with you and many others at different angles, is why he was so late to stealing the election. He evinced a lot of desire to steal the election, which itself is unconstitutional, obviously. Whether he's criminally charged for that or not, there's an open probe in Georgia. That's a more legalistic question. But he was late to that. Do you know from your reporting why it was such a sloppy effort, and whether he literally just didn't know that he would be short the votes, or why it didn't start earlier, and why the big question both these books and others raise, why, if he was willing to go that far, did he never actually, according to public accounts, try to carry out the violent coup outside of the citizen insurrection?
Well, I think this president, what we saw for 3 years and into the last year, lives moment to moment, headline to headline. I know that there was literally no long-term communications plan in the White House after the first few months of the White House. And, there was a sense in my reporting and right in the book here that those first couple of weeks after the election, Trump wasn't foaming at the mouth, as Mark Meadows would later describe him to Mark Esper and Mark Milley. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't screaming. And that left these other folks, the other senior advisors, with the impression that he just needed his own way. He needed to blow off steam his own way. He would eventually find his own path to acknowledge Biden as the president, and he just needed some space. But by giving him space, what that did was create an opening for people like Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and some of those folks to come in and tell Trump what he wanted to hear.
Yeah, he blew off steam, and he summoned his supporters to January 6th, and people died, and people were beat up, and people got badly hurt, and it could have been worse. And we know from the footage now how close elected officials were to what could have been a much, much worse scene. Jon Meacham, I want to ask you again about that same issue of the sort of the what Michael calls that moment-to-moment sloppiness, because, the First Amendment grants really broad speech freedoms, but it has a line at which, you can't just give out instructions to make homemade illegal bombs and then call that speech. And likewise, if I had to, in theory, I could write a long-term playbook given the constitutional and legal rules of federalism for how you would better press to overthrow an election. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to write it. I'm not going to do it on air. You could do it, too, because I know you're a historian and a legal scholar. But what about that? I mean, how lucky, I guess my question to you is, are we lucky that Donald Trump himself didn't have that ability and apparently didn't have people around him to do that? Because if he started earlier in some ways that I'm not going to get into, it could have been worse.
Oh, it absolutely could have been worse. And what Michael's book and other reporting is showing is just how much worse it could have been. And it's not an excuse, just parenthetically, to those who are within the administration, to child-proof the Oval Office for his emotional outbursts. At a certain point, you have an obligation to the Constitution and to the country itself. I'm not being clinically distant and pretending that I don't know what it's like to be. I understand that when you're an institution and you have this powerful force at the center of it, of course you trim here and there. But we're way beyond that. And what we're seeing, again, because of Michael's reporting and others, is just how close we came to, I believe, an end or a fundamental end to the constitutional republic. And I'm not being hyperbolic. The Confederate States of America, their forces only got as far as Fort Stevens during the Civil War. They got inside the Capitol this time, 6 months ago. And so I think that you ask, are we lucky? Absolutely. Bismarck is alleged to have said, for some reason, God loves drunks, little children in the United States of America. I just don't want to test that affection again and again.
All very good, important points. And while we often lean on Jay-Z or Drake, I think a Bismarck quote fit in perfectly, John.
Thank you. I do what I can for you.